Welcome back to these lectures on Western civilization. We're going to talk about absolutism versus constitutionalism. I know this sounds terribly boring. It's actually more interesting than it sounds. What we're going to do is track where the power lies in England and France, and we're going to bounce back and forth between these two countries as they emerge as powerful nation states in the 17th, 18th centuries. So let's start with significances. France and England take divergent paths in how to govern their kingdoms. France follows the absolute rule of the monarch, and by absolutism we mean the power lies in the hands of the king. By constitutionalism, think of your own U.S. Constitution, where power is spread out among various people, various branches of government in our case. So again, where does the power lie? That's really the basis of this lecture. In France, the absolute monarch is a part of that great chain of being. As God rules the heavens, so the king will rule his people here on earth. These absolute monarchs have this notion of the divine right of kings. That is, God sanctions the king's rule. He rules by divine right. We'll see this notion attacked when we get to the Enlightenment. In England, there's a trend towards parliamentary power, with the monarch participating, but without any sort of absolute or dictatorial powers. This English model will prevail in the future of Western Europe, and it will prevail where the English established colonies around the world, including here in the North American colonies that will become the United States. These democratic societies will become the model for other peoples around the world in the 20th century. So we're talking about 17th century France and England and how they arrive at the answer to that question. Where does the power lie? 17th century Europe saw the evolution of two strikingly effective forms of state power: absolute monarchy with the Bourbon monarchy in France, and constitutional monarchy exemplified by the Stuart dynasty in England. Now, the 16th century Tudor dynasty, and you guys have all heard of King Henry VIII and of course his daughter Elizabeth I. The success of the Tudor dynasty in the 16th century is contrasted with really the disasters of the Stuart dynasty in England in the 17th century. And we'll talk about these revolutions, the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution of 1688. So while representative institutions decline in France, the English Parliament gains sovereign authority. You can see the divergence between the two countries. In religion, the French gradually abandoned the toleration set forth by Henry IV with his Edict of Nantes, which granted freedom of worship to the Huguenots. Whereas in England, there is increasingly a sense of toleration for minority religions. Remember, 1684, Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes. 5 years later, 1689, in England, the English Parliament passed the Toleration Act. So again, the countries, England and France, are moving in divergent directions. France and England did have in common the fact that they had established firm national sovereignty over their territories. This is unlike the Germans, the Italians, the Poles, the Turks, the Russians, people east of the Rhine still have a ways to go to establish national sovereignty. France was a comparatively homogeneous nation or kingdom, linguistically and culturally, religiously. Of course, we see the wars of religion will explode that to a degree. But there is a sense of political cohesion in both England and France, a sense of community spirit. Let's talk about French absolutism in a little more detail here. To the objective observer, France probably would look more impressive than England. It was the French who sort of replaced the Renaissance Italians as the arbiters of aesthetic life and of civility. The French language is widely spoken, their books are widely read, their tastes are copied by well-bred persons across the continent. The 17th century was also France's sort of grand century in international affairs. France has the biggest population in Europe, the biggest army, the largest tax revenues, probably the most effective bureaucracy. France in the 17th century sort of replaces Spain's dominance in the 16th century, now reverts to France. France is a model of successful absolutism, not constitutionalism. Now, let's track this strong, powerful France to three persons, three statesmen: King Henry IV, Cardinal Richelieu, and Cardinal Mazarin. These men are quite different in personality and tactics, but these two cardinals, who are sort of act as, what would be a good term, a good analogy, sort of as prime ministers, and King Henry IV have similar goals. That is to weaken local particularism in France, to create a more unified kingdom and eliminate local power bases. We'll talk about this further when we talk about the French Revolution and the parliaments scattered around local power bases in France that can resist the king's will. These three men want to strengthen the central royal authority in Paris. They want to enlarge French territory with an aggressive foreign policy. A couple of words here about King Henry IV. He spent the first half of his reign in the late 16th century trying to end the wars of religion. And in the second half of his reign, in the early 17th century, he tries to secure domestic peace in France. Henry's quite clever about how he does this. He buys off internal opposition. He bribes his Catholic subjects by joining their church. He buys off his Huguenot subjects by guaranteeing them religious and civil autonomy through the Edict of Nantes. And Henry bought off the commanders of the Ultra-Catholic League by paying them to disband their troops. So you can see that Henry's overall objective here is to create a unity, a peaceful kingdom in which people can follow their own conscience. This will change under Louis XIV to follow. Cardinal Richelieu, this is a key figure in the development of modern France, indeed in the development of European diplomacy. He becomes Louis XIII's chief minister in 1624. He directed the French government until his death. Richelieu's foreign policy was more product than Catholic whenever state interest required that. Richelieu lived by the philosophy of raison d'etat. This is any workable expedient was justifiable as long as it served French interest. Raison d'etat, or reason of state interest over religious interest or any other interest. Richelieu was willing to tolerate French Protestants because he saw that they were more likely to remain politically harmless if they weren't harassed and prosecuted. Once Richelieu had reestablished domestic order, he picked up where Henry IV left off, and he entered into the wars of religion against the Hapsburgs. We talked about that briefly in our Wars of Religion lecture. From Richelieu's point of view, the international situation in the 1620s was alarming. While France had stood by neutral during the opening years of the 30 Years' War, France's Hapsburg rivals to the east in Austria had slowly gained the upper hand. Ferdinand II, the Holy Roman Emperor, appeared to be well on his way to converting the Holy Roman Empire into an absolute monarchy. So, to combat this, to keep Ferdinand II from creating a strong centralized state on France's eastern borders, Richelieu does something that is regarded as outrageous, certainly by the Catholic Church and other Catholic monarchs. He subsidizes a Swedish army, a Protestant Swedish army, under Gustavus Adolphus to combat his fellow Catholics in the Holy Roman Empire. So you see the interests of state prevail over any sort of religious loyalty. It was Richelieu who laid the groundwork for French diplomatic success and the Hapsburg defeat. We see this played out at the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which we talked about in the Wars of Religion as well. So we've talked about a little bit about Henry IV, a bit about Richelieu, and now Cardinal Mazarin. He follows Richelieu's policies. He essentially trains young Louis XIV, the Sun King, as a young boy growing up into power. He directed French foreign affairs from 1653 to 1661 when he died. He sort of reaped the rewards of Richelieu's raison d'etat, this policy of putting state interest above all else. At the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, he secured very advantageous terms for the French. Portions of Alsace and Lorraine, these provinces that lie sort of between France and Germany, are returned to France. The Holy Roman Empire remained fragmented and weak, and France retained its dominant position. Now, before we go on to Louis XIV, the Sun King, we'll take a break, and we'll be back in a few minutes.